This 5-Minute Friday is all about ground covers and using ground covers in the landscape. We're down here at the Giberson Garden in Athens, Georgia, and this garden probably has more examples of ground covers than we could find probably in any other garden. It's just an incredible collection of ground covers. A few of them are bullies in this garden, and there's a few that really need to be edited from this garden that can take over pretty quick. But the vast majority of them play pretty nice. They get up against something else and they're pressing on one another, but they're not really trying to, they're not doing any significant damage to it, giving you time to come in and edit a little bit out. So this garden is an example of plant thick and edit later. So that, and the reason for that is the plants, when they have their roots shaded, this is how plants are in nature. They're right up against one another. And so they're in competition with one another, obviously, but they're also protecting each other's roots from direct sunlight. They're capturing water that falls and prevents it from running off. They're capturing the leaves and other debris that the upper story plants are dropping into that space and keeping that organic material in place. They're preventing other things from growing. So, me and my friend over here are going to take over this entire space so we don't end up with a third friend in that space. So there's a very limited amount of weeds in this garden that weren't planted intentionally. Obviously something can become a weed, if it gets out of control in your garden, even things that you plant intentionally. But everything here was planted with intent. I see virtually no, there's no crabgrass and the kinds of weeds we get in gardens where we leave these gaps between things. There's no room for that in this garden. Just in this space, she's got ground covers as ground covers, but she's also has some low growing shrubs. There's a Radicans gardenia here. There's a dwarf azalea in the back. So very low shrubs can count as ground covers as well if they're planted thickly, planted several together. She's used lamb's ear in that spot, and there's various the crafty part of this garden is if there's a hole down the road, down the way, around a corner up here that needs filling, she'll just come and grab a piece of this lamb's ear or a piece of this ajuga that's next to it or a piece of this geranium that's next to it or a handful of that hosta back there, and she'll fill that spot. So you'll see these ground covers repeated in this garden, and she'll find the one that kind of contrasts with the other things that are there already in either color or texture or whatever. But just in this one little area, we have shrubs. Again, lamb's ear, ajuga, geranium, hosta back in that area. A couple perennials that are coming up through it. So we have some perennials that we're shooting this at the end of April, and so not everything has come up through here yet. Strawberry begonias in full bloom, and Steph will talk more about a couple of these things that I'm talking about here in an upcoming video that you guys will see pretty soon. But just in that section, you have this contrast between dark foliage things, variegated things, light colored, different flower color, different leaf shape, different texture. So rather than, you can solve a space like this with one thing. You could go out and buy one thing, and certainly the strawberry begonia is certainly showy enough to cover this entire space if you wanted to do that. But I think overall it does look better to have these more varieties in a space. And if some sort of problem came along with one of them, then other things would be able to, the other things would fill in that space in the future. You wouldn't have to necessarily to replant it. She will put ground covers in spots that we wouldn't even think about putting ground covers in. They're in between the rocks here in the transition where you'd probably have weeds growing if you didn't have plants that you intentionally planted growing. She has this variegated acarus right there, and then a dwarf mondo grass over there on that side. So rather than having a weed, which would come up in this space, in fact, the crack in front of it has a couple weeds in it, she will plant these ground cover plants. All of the stone in this garden is not irrigated. things go in the ground. She's not planting them in peak summer, but she'll plant them at the right time of year, probably water them in once, and then they have to compete pretty quick. She's amended this soil with a lot of organic material over the years, but one of the main features of this garden is these stones have water under them almost all the time. So all of these plants have access, to that water underneath them. One of the other main purposes of ground covers like this is eliminating the need for mulch. So this is a living mulch. So this is a space that, once you've installed these things, you may have to come back in and clean them up eventually. There are, a lot of these plants will collect so much debris underneath them over time. I mean, meaning leaves and those kinds of things, that it does probably do you good at some point to kind of reset them, clean them up a bit, and then, allow them to come back out from that. Lots of things can be ground covers. We have woody shrubs, like, sub shrubs almost, like these junipers that she's using. The junipers will tend to be, the shrub ground covers tend to be a little more tame in the garden. They're a little easier to control. These blue star junipers, these Procumbens nana junipers, even using this little dwarf Camucypris is almost like a ground cover there. They're going to be more tame. They're going to be easier to deal with than the spreading ones. But the spreading ones are going to cover more ground and get things covered more quickly. They're just going to have some control added to them at some point. So there's vines are another thing. Some vines are good at ground covering. Some only climb. So you need to separate those two things. But some vining plants will crawl as well. Fat's hedera is a good example of that. But this is incredible transition from space to space to space in this garden. Paths allow for lots of ground cover. So this garden is divided into paths all over the place, which creates these spaces where you can tuck in ground covers, all kinds of interesting ground covers all over the place, and then build up your landscape from these edges. The other thing is, all of her paths in here, the other thing the ground covers do is they create soft edges on the paths. So all of these paths could be just rigid 3-foot wide paths that go through the garden like this, but with these ground covers planted along the edge of it, it softens it here and there, It just makes it look more like a natural path would look if you were walking through a wooded space or something like that. So there you go. There's some of the benefits of ground covers. We have quite a few in our garden in Raleigh, but it is one of those things. You may plant something at some point that you need to edit out really quickly. If it gets going in a hurry and you think that you might not be able to control it, you want to get rid of it pretty quick and maybe find a different solution to that. The difference between a ground cover and a bully is kind of a thin, it can be a bit of a thin line. So keep that in mind. Thanks for watching.